Snow was falling fast and heavy when Emily Hartman went missing from her peaceful Anchorage neighborhood, a city of close to 300,000 residents where blizzard winter is a way of life. But this one, on December 20th, 2013, was not like the others. On this night, a fierce blizzard rolled into Alaska's largest city, plunging the temperature into a bone-freezing -20 degrees. At 8:45 p.m., Emily sent a quick text to her parents. "I'm home." Just a simple message after a night at her school's Christmas concert. In the living room, her dark green backpack sat neatly beside the sofa, her red wool scarf draped across it, still damp from the snow. Everything looked perfectly ordinary until it wasn't. When her dad returned at around 9:30 p.m., the first thing he saw was that her coat and shoes were still in the house. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. Whatever transpired in the hours in between would haunt Anchorage for decades to come. Before we continue on Emily's case, ensure you're subscribed and notifications are enabled. You don't want to miss where the story goes from here. That evening, Anchorage was smothered with a thick white blanket. Snowdrifts formed on roofs and sidewalks, the city ground to a frozen silence. The roads were deserted except for the occasional flash of headlights slicing through the tempest. Within the high school auditorium, however, warmth and laughter reigned. The Christmas concert had just concluded, the applause still ringing. Smiling among the outgoing crowd was 16-year-old Emily Hartman, bright-eyed, cheerful, and abounding in holiday cheer. With her dark brown locks and that unforgettable smile, she glowed. Her best friend, Deanna Ross, and Deanna's father, Russell, had given her a ride home. The roads were slippery. Then Emily's mother came in from her shift at the hospital. She scarcely had time to enter the room before her knees buckled and she collapsed into a chair. Her face was white, her eyes staring in shock. "Where is my daughter?" she wailed. "She said she was home. Why is she missing?" No one had an answer. Only the constant click of cameras, the scratch of pens and notepads, and the low murmur of radios filling the air. By 10:45 p.m., the lead investigator spoke quietly but firmly. She came home, took off her scarf, left her things. Then someone came to the door or through the back. No struggle, no sound. This was fast. Fast. We're treating it as an abduction. The words hit like a hammer. The air in the room stopped moving. Orders were given instantly. The perimeter was locked down. All nearby officers were deployed. On the street, new patrol cars pulled up one behind the other, red and blue lights flashing across the snow in bursts of color. The Amber Alert went out over Alaska, phones vibrated, radios interrupted, television broadcasts cut off mid-sentence with the same intense warning. At 11 p.m., Anchorage, half asleep under a blizzard, burst to life. Patrol cars traveled in close convoys along the icy streets. Helicopters flew low, their spotlights casting across the thick woods behind the Hartman house. On foot, the officers fanned out with K-9 teams, praying to catch a whiff of Emily's scent from her boots. But in -20, the snow continued to fall, covering everything nearly as fast as it emerged. What began as a rescue operation was becoming a race against time and the weather. By midnight, there were hundreds of volunteers, neighbors, classmates, church members, anyone wrapped in scarves and parkas, flashlights held aloft. They spread out in clusters through the streets and woods, shouting Emily's name into the wind. Their voices died away, swallowed by the storm. Others dug snowdrifts with shovels, others searched parked cars, ditches, and sheds. That afternoon, the investigation widened. Detectives began knocking on doors across the neighborhood, hoping someone, anyone, had seen something unusual that night. A shadow near the fence, a car idling on the street, a stranger in the snow. Meanwhile, fresh search parties spread out to nearby convenience stores, gas stations, and intersections within a few miles of the Hartman residence. Police asked for security tapes, the majority of them low resolution, grainy, and in black and white. Dozens of tapes flowed into the analysis room, and detectives crouched in the gloom, replaying every second between 9 o'clock and 10 p.m., the moment Emily disappeared. Meanwhile, the police hotline rang constantly. Anchorage residents phoned in with a gamut of hopeful tips to spine-tingling claims. I heard a scream in the wind. I saw a girl running through an alley. I think I saw someone by the school. That single description kindled a glimmer of hope. If the sighting was genuine, it meant Emily had managed to leave the house. Perhaps she'd met up with someone she knew, or someone who persuaded her to go along. In minutes, a team was sent to the mall. They searched the parking lots, entrances, and surrounding streets. Security footage was taken from each camera that pointed towards the lot. Hours ticked by as police leaned over the screens, beating up and rewinding through blurry, snowy images. Customers filtered in and out, cars drove in and out. Then, finally, a lull. A person with brown long hair clad in a light sweater walked into view at 9:43 p.m., crossing the line of the camera sight. The room went quiet. Was it her? The technician slowly zoomed in. The face came into view just sharply enough to clearly see it, and everyone's heart fell. The mall footage girl was recognized that evening, a normal customer, a couple of years older than Emily. The cab driver hadn't lied. He'd simply seen what his mind was ready to see on a snowy, dark evening. A tragic error, but an honest one. The report was short and sterile. Witness sighting, unrelated. False. That one sentence struck the Hartman family like a sledgehammer. Emily's mom had grasped an officer's sleeve a while back, saying, "So someone actually saw her?" When she got to hear the truth, her expression became vacant, her hope fading once more. For the police, it was another blow to the gut. But it also made one thing brutally apparent. Whatever had happened, the person who took Emily had not been careless. No witnesses, no good footage, no trail. Whoever did this was professional. Detectives rode back into the command center in silence, snow continuing to fall outside frosted windows. To add insult to injury, the samples were small and were partly deteriorated, broken by the combination of warm air inside and frigid air outside that evening. And forensic equipment in 2013, while impressive at the time, wasn't anywhere close to as sensitive as we have it now. Even the sofa fabric whispered nothing to them. Ordinary synthetic material, mass-produced, applied to hundreds of thousands of jackets and gloves. There was no possible way to track it back to an individual. When the first forensic report came through to the investigation team, it was starkly concise. No Cody's match, no Aphie's match. DNA sample too small to fully analyze. The room fell silent. An officer frayed his fingers over his forehead. Another gazed at the floor. They'd been expecting even the tiniest hint, a hair, a partial print, something that would lead them anywhere. Emily's dad sat silently while the detective described the outcome. His fists clutched so hard that his knuckles whitened. Her mom wept softly in the hallway, saying the same thing over and over. No match. No match. To investigators, that meant their best weapons, science, information, forensics, had let them down. The prints outside didn't point to anyone. The house contained no identifying residue. The cameras had provided nothing helpful. Almost 2 weeks since Emily disappeared, the case was starting to go cold. Frustration seeped into the search. Some officers pursued false tips and social media hoaxes. Others wasted hours confirming nameless tips that led nowhere. The hotline rang with self-styled witnesses, psychics, and publicity seekers. Each tip had to be investigated, but none panned out. The urgency started to dissipate. The term nobody was willing to use, cold case, lingered unspoken in every gathering. Without some dramatic breakthrough, Emily's name might end up like one more file in the extensive list of never-solved Alaskan vanishments. To the Hartmans, that thought was intolerable. And then, just when the case was about to slide away forever, a man appeared at the Anchorage police station. It was mid-January 2014, and it was freezing outside. The man was homeless, disoriented, shaking as he stood at the front desk. The man recounted the way he tailed Emily after the concert, broken into her house, and led her out into the night. For the first time in weeks, the investigative unit saw a glimmer of excitement permeate the room. Someone had spoken up. Someone might at long last have the answer to the enigma that had engulfed Anchorage. But as questioning got underway, cracks in the story developed quickly. The group concurred. They would revisit everyone associated with Emily's community, neighbors, school staff visitors, anyone who'd been out of place but not thoroughly vetted. That choice was the turning point. Going back through the initial reports once more, one name started to really stand out, a name they'd ignored amidst the fray of unfounded leads. He resided only 2 miles from the Hartman residence, a quiet, reserved Middle East war veteran respected by the people of Anchorage. Early on, he appeared harmless enough, the sort of individual people characterized as a little strange but polite. So his name had dropped off the list. Now, with all other avenues tried, Robert Kane's conduct began to appear different, alarmingly different. In the weeks following Emily's disappearance, Robert was everywhere. He attended community vigils, always sitting in the front row. Sometimes he even spoke publicly, saying things like, "I'm a father too, I understand this pain." He offered his own theories about what might have happened, talking to reporters, comforting neighbors. But there was something disturbing in the manner in which he did it. His subdued, almost clinical voice, the non-correspondence between his words and what appeared to be his expression. One day, during one of those vigils, he agreed to an on-camera interview. He remarked if a girl arrived home at 8:45 but disappeared before 9:30, the stalker certainly had her routine. That statement didn't make front-page news back then, but when police watched the tape months later, their guts fell out. The time period, he said, 8:45 to 9:30, was precisely the time Emily vanished, and that fact never made public release. How did he know? When officers came back to Robert for a relaxed follow-up, they inquired about Emily. He told them he didn't know her, had never ever talked to her, said he only knew her from neighborhood postings. But when discussion shifted toward the evening she went missing, he made a mistake. "I heard she arrived home around 9, he said nonchalantly. Investigators shared stinging looks. Only a few officers and Emily's family were privy to that exact moment. Information withheld from all the press releases. Pressed, Robert quickly backtracked. "Everybody in the area knows," he replied before cutting the interview short. Something about Robert Kane wasn't right anymore. And soon, detectives would learn that under his unruffled, neighborly facade, he'd been concealing much more than anyone had ever dreamed. One of the neighbors recalled viewing Robert's dilapidated old blue pickup truck, leaving. "We've used every available means, processing surveillance videos, speaking with witnesses, and conducting forensic analysis. Sadly, we have no active leads at present to investigate. Emily Hartman's disappearance will be a cold case." Those antiseptic words sliced as a knife through the room. Emily's father sat in the front row, fists clasped so hard his knuckles were white, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her mother wept before the cameras, her face ashen and gaunt with loss. They had held on to each telephone call, each rumor, each glimmer of police hope for 3 agonizing months. And now all they had left was nothing, and a file being pushed into a metal drawer. Throughout Anchorage, the news was a punch. Neighbors who had once participated in search parties now kept their curtains shut. The Emily posters, her smiling face in her choir outfit, peeled and flaked on the light poles, the ink wearing off in wind and snow. But within the Hartman household, hope did not perish. Every year, when winter arrived and Christmas drew near, they observed a vigil for Emily in their little local church. Candles lit up, hymns sang out, and individuals, friends, neighbors, even strangers, came out to recollect the girl who never returned home. It was the one thing that sustained her parents. To them, Emily was not lost. She was still present in the silent reaches of her room, in the echo of giggles that the house would not let pass. For the Anchorage police, though, the case was just another code, one more unsolved puzzle on Alaska's lengthy roster of vanishments. Hundreds of names, hundreds of tales, all locked in cabinets awaiting answers that never materialized. That quiet hurt more than anything. The Hartmans understood that from now on, uncovering the truth would not lie in evidence or pressure from the police, but in faith and perseverance. Somehow, they were convinced justice would come back. Meanwhile, just 2 miles away, Robert Kane lived in quiet obscurity. He still went to church, still greeted neighbors, still walked the same streets. And while the city had forgotten, his name remained like a shadow, unspoken but never forgotten. 2 years passed, and Anchorage flipped the page, and Emily's face faded from the headlines, but her case file sat buried in the depths of the Unsolved Cases Unit, a thick file of yellowed photographs, scribbled notes, and unresolved questions. Then in 2016, a new caseworker, fresh to the department and raring to... The series went back through each chapter of the case, from Emily's final choir concert to the cryptic footprints by the window. Reporters hunted down former neighbors, even attending the same church where Robert Kane, still residing just 2 miles away, frequently showed up at prayer vigils. One headline put it this way: "There are faces we see every day, but do we ever truly know who they are?" The stories revived public interest. Emily's beaming picture, wearing her green choir robe, once more made front pages and television screens throughout Alaska. For a time, it seemed that the case would perhaps rouse back to life, but hope was fleeting. Alaska's strained resources and long string of open cases meant that a new unit could not be started overnight. Within weeks, the headlines disappeared. The public forgot. The Hartmans, however, never did. They left Emily's photograph hanging on their porch every Christmas, a quiet beacon against the chill. But they understood now media attention alone would not yield answers. Behind closed doors, the evidence remained unopened in that same steel file marked by those same words, inactive, pending future developments. And for the Hartman family, that meant another year of excruciating quiet. Then, in 2021, close to 8 years since Emily went missing, a small but forceful wave of hope ran through Alaska's web of missing person families. Something was brewing. The state of Alaska had just been granted federal funding to initiate forensic genealogy, a revolutionary method that had solved scores of cold cases nationwide. And less than a week later, one name emerged from the darkness of abandoned files: Emily Hartman. For almost a decade, her parents had struggled to keep her memory alive, petitioning, writing letters, pleading with officials not to allow her case to fade. And now, finally, science had caught up to their hope. Deep in the Anchorage Police Department's evidence storage, sealed since 2013, lay the fragile remains of the investigation: a few long brown hairs from the family's sofa and a small stained piece of carpet cut out from the living room floor. Back then, these samples were too degraded for analysis. But now, with advanced DNA sequencing, those same fragments became invaluable.
Technicians in pristine white laboratories opened the evidence with caution, removing teeny-tiny amounts of genetic material. In contrast to the unsuccessful approaches years ago, the new method could reconstruct full DNA profiles based on only a few compromised cells.
When the analysis was transferred into genealogical databases, such as GEDmatch and Family Tree DNAs, places where individuals intentionally... The bone samples were shipped to the state crime lab in a hurry, where analysts utilized the same cutting-edge DNA sequencing tool that had reopened the investigation. When the results returned days later, there could be no doubt about the finding. The DNA was a complete genetic match for Emily's parents. After almost 9 years of waiting, the truth had finally emerged from under Alaskan soil itself. When detectives broke the news to the Hartmans, their small living room erupted in both sobs and silence. Emily's mother grasped her husband's hand, shaking as tears streamed freely down her face. Her father nodded his head, his voice little more than a whisper. "At least she's home." The instant police verified the body was Emily Hartman's, her mother slumped at the kitchen table, her wails shattering the silence that had besieged their home for almost a decade. For so long, she'd existed in agony, never quite knowing if her daughter was alive somewhere or buried under Alaska's vast expanse of snow. Now, the reality was cruel, but it was truth. With tears, her husband croaked hoarsely, "At least we can bring her home." The news coursed through Anchorage like a chill breeze. That night, Emily's beaming face appeared on television screens again, but this time, the headline below read, "Neighborhood residents crept up silently, depositing flowers, candles, and handwritten messages on the Hartman family porch." Hundreds also gathered at Emily's old church, where she used to sing in the choir. The breeze was crisp, the air calm. Hymns filled the night as people prayed not only for Emily's soul but for the truth to finally, agonizingly come to light. But for investigators, that light shone darker. The finding of Emily's body meant one thing: this was no vanishing act. It was murder. In Alaska's State Forensic Laboratory, scientists mournfully surrounded Emily's corpse. From initial examination, one grim detail was evident: a clean, round shot in the right side of her skull. It was the unmistakable sign of a bullet wound. X-ray tests verified it. The bullet remained lodged deep within, kept intact for almost a decade by frozen ground. The room was silent as the lead pathologist uttered the words everyone feared: gunshot wound to the head. Emily hadn't left. She hadn't stumbled or gotten lost in the snow. She'd been shot. The investigation was redirected. After 9 long years, Emily's story was no longer a mystery. It was a homicide, and the hunt for her killer had just begun. Within hours, the story spread across Alaska, turning one family's heartbreak into a statewide reckoning. Questions flooded living rooms and online forums alike. Who could have approached Emily so easily? Who had the means and knowledge to bury a body in such a remote, frozen area and disappear for almost a decade? And, perhaps most hauntingly, how had all these clues stayed hidden under the snow for so long? When the bullet was found stuck in Emily's head, it was no longer a mystery of an abducted teen. It was a manhunt. And slowly, the town's fragmented suspicions turned back around to one name that had been persistently lurking on the back pages of police reports for years: Robert Kane. Kane had lived only 2 miles from the Hartmans. He'd attended vigils, expressed sympathy, even spoken nicely about Emily, but his previous interviews had never quite added up. Facts changed. Timelines swayed, and now with forensic evidence pointing to murder, those discrepancies began flashing like beacons in a black room. The forensic report from the state proved what everyone did not want to believe. Emily had been shot in the head at close range. The bullet was still inside her skull, and her body had been taken pains to bury near Fairbanks. That was enough for investigators to begin reconstructing what had actually happened. Within the Anchorage Police Department Cold Case Unit, a massive corkboard covered the meeting room wall. Red string ran from pinned photographs and documents, tying together 2 far-flung points in time: December 20th, 2013, the evening of the Christmas concert, and July 2022, when remains of Emily were discovered. The board chronicled the events step by step. The Christmas concert at Emily's high school let out at 8 p.m. Emily was present, singing, laughing, perfectly normal. Teachers, peers, parents all attested to it. No distress, no odd behavior. At about 8:15 p.m., Emily departed with her best friend Deanna Ross and Deanna's dad Russell. Both had given repeated accounts of how they dropped her off safe and sound. Emily even did the little signal she always did, double-flashed the porch light to inform her parents. As detectives compared the timeline to Robert's account, inconsistencies stood out. He had reported to investigators that he spent the evening at home watching TV, but multiple separate neighbors reported his truck departing between 9 p.m. and not coming back for days, precisely the time when Emily would have been compelled towards Fairbanks. Those days-long disappearances coincided with the time needed to transport a corpse 150 miles in snowy conditions, and his casual awareness of the covered tracks, a fact which had never been released, indicated he was either at the Hartman house or at least had first-hand, unauthorized information about the location. The chief investigator reduced it to simple terms. We have witnesses, conflicting statements, suspicious activity, and, most importantly, a classified fact about the footprints. Only the killer would know. On that evaluation, Robert Kane went from a suspect to the prime suspect. That was the investigation's biggest breakthrough since Emily's remains were discovered. For the Hartman family, the news was bitterly compounded. They recalled Robert's soothing small talk at vigils, his observations and remarks now sounding like a cover-up. Emily's mother said to reporters, shaking, "If it's really him, we saw our daughter's murderer every week for years and didn't know." The father replayed memories of offhand conversations, now tainted by the possibility that they had been uttered by the man who had kidnapped their child. From there, the investigation focused all its attention on Robert Kane. Detectives realized they had suspicion, but they needed more than that. They needed something that would stand up to cross-examination in court. That required finding someone who could put Robert where he said he wasn't. Someone close to him at the time of that pivotal period. They decided to look at the person most likely to know his whereabouts, his former wife, Angela Hicks. Divorced several years before and currently out of state, Angela had characterized Robert to friends and relatives as secretive, cold, and uncommunicative. At the urging of detectives through her lawyer, Angela was lured back to Anchorage to testify with investigators. Her testimony could be pivotal. She could verify whether Robert had been present at home that evening, whether he'd spoken of trips, or if he'd been strange in subsequent days. Another neighbor a block away recalled seeing Robert in his backyard, leaning over something she couldn't quite see, and later digging madly at the snow as if he was desperately trying to erase something. In a rusty old chest in the basement, the detectives found a handgun, serial number removed. It was a standard military model of the type Robert served with. Ballistics experts tested it, and the news sent a shiver down the department's spine. The gun's caliber was an exact match for the bullet extracted from Emily Hartman's skull. That would have been enough to seal the deal, but it wasn't the only thing they found. On a bed in Robert's bedroom rested a big map of Alaska, pinpricked with red dots, one of them exactly over the location near Fairbanks, where Emily's body was discovered. Zigzag lines mapped what appeared to be a nighttime course running directly from Anchorage, and then came the find that dispelled the last shred of doubt. In a box of cardboard in the garage were dozens of yellowed newspapers regarding Emily's vanishing, all the articles clipped, underlined, written on. Some of the photos of Emily had her face ringed in red pencil, and titles such as "No Leads in Teens Case" underlined in pencil. It resembled an obsession, or worse, a trophy room. When detectives spread out the evidence on a metal table in headquarters, the gun, the map, the newspaper album of clippings, the image was finally complete. A gun of the same caliber as the one used to kill Emily, a map directly to where Emily was buried, and a pile of newspaper clippings with an unsettling preoccupation. When investigators presented all that evidence, the puzzle clicked into place. Angela's testimony, the neighbors' accounts, and Robert's abnormally accurate knowledge of the hidden footprint detail created one inescapable image. Robert Kane wasn't merely suspicious anymore. He was the person responsible for Emily Hartman's murder. At a crowded press conference, the Anchorage police spokesperson took the microphone and uttered the words the town had been waiting almost 10 years to hear. "We found critical evidence in favor of long-standing suspicions. Robert Kane is no longer..." Yet that interview turned it all around. In an overnight sensation, Robert Kane was a household name throughout Alaska. His face, arms crossed, eyes icily aloof, was on every television screen. Coffee shops hummed, church pews hushed, and dinner tables argued. Public outcry against the police reached new heights. The public wanted closure. They wanted justice for Emily. And by February of 2023, even as snow-covered Anchorage in white silence, the city vibrated with tension. Following months of gathering their evidence, from Angela's testimony to the gun, the map, and Robert's ill-fated murder slip, investigators moved at last to close this long, frigid case. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom like a final gavel fall upon a decade of darkness. "This is no accident," the prosecutor declared, his voice calm but resolute. "These are remnants of guilt." And then there was the defense. Standing up slowly, his hand grasping the edge of the table like a man grasping the final shred of hope, Robert Kane's lawyer addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, "no one witnessed Robert Kane kidnapping Emily. No camera records him taking her somewhere, and not a single DNA strand conclusively connects him to that moment. The prosecution constructed a narrative out of inference and sentiment. My client, a lonely veteran, was their convenient target." He paused, surveying the jurors' faces, hoping to find even one sympathetic look. "This isn't justice," he went on. "It's desperation." But the tide had already shifted. As Angela Hicks got up to the stand, the courtroom was silent. Her voice shook at first, but she braced herself, each sentence slicing through the air like a knife. "I saw him arrive home covered in blood on his jacket," she whispered. "He torched his truck that evening, and he made me read all the newspaper articles about Emily. He said she would never return." Each statement hit with greater force than the previous. Some of the jurors averted their eyes, others dabbed at their tears. The prosecution followed with the neighbor, the truck heading out that evening. The forensic experts came next, establishing the gun used was of the same caliber